Hello and welcome to Addicted to Lacrosse. This is Season 2, Episode 14, on Sunday, March 29th, 2015, at a special time. Um, my name's Graham Perro. With me today are Tyler Fitch and Melissa Daphne. We had some scheduling issues, so we decided to do a Sunday afternoon show rather than Sunday or Monday evening like we normally do. Um, So we have the Q&A app running on Google+, so head over there if you've got some questions or comments, and of course if you're listening live. If you're not listening live, none of this stuff will work. We are also on Twitter at Lax Podcast, so send us some messages there if you like. A few games to talk about. One is upcoming, so obviously we can't talk too much about that one. But there are a few items of news to talk about this week. One kind of overshadows most of the rest, so we'll kind of skim over the smaller ones till we get to the big one. A couple of rumors posted on Twitter and various message boards and places this week. Things like Calgary was looking for a goaltender. Trade deadline is on Tuesday, so that's why there's so much movement, or so many rumors at least going around right now. Calgary looking for a goaltender. There was a couple of tweets saying that Colin Doyle may actually return before the end of the season. Now, if I'm not mistaken, the Rock would have to actually put him on the active roster before Tuesday or Wednesday, I'm not sure which, in order for that to happen. And I've seen no movement of that since then, so that may have just been a possibility that isn't going to happen. Buffalo looking for a lefty forward.
That one's a little weird because they have Mitch Jones finishing up his college hockey season and coming back to play as a lefty forward in the next week or two. So to be looking for one when you've got one coming to you is odd. Somebody thought that would be like a rumor worth talking about.
Yeah, I don't know. I don't know if all of these came from In Lacrosse We Trust, but I think at least the Calgary one did. The Colin Doyle one was tweeted by I don't remember who it was, but it wasn't in Lax. It was somebody else. So I don't know where the Buffalo one came from. Other news: Rob Hellier's out this week. He was injured last weekend. I believe they said it was an upper body injury, so an arm or a shoulder, elbow, something. They weren't specific on what it was. They did say he would miss this week's game, and he indeed did not play last night, but should be back next weekend, so that's good news for the Rock. One trade this week: Buffalo traded the rights to Drew Petkoff and a fourth rounder this year to New England for a second rounder next year. Petkoff hasn't played this year. I don't think he even played last year. But he also didn't play today for the Black Wolves. I thought that he had tweeted he was going to be there, but I guess he never made it, or he wasn't available, or for whatever reason he did not play today. The Black Wolves also picked up Jimmy Purvis, who played most recently with the Rock last year, and he did play today. So New England kind of shoring up their defense a little bit there. So that's it for sort of less big news, and of course the big one is Garrett Billings. Has been a holdout from the Rock for at least a month now. I guess he was cleared to play in mid-February, and nothing's happened since then. Rumors have been going around about trades and such. So finally, Rochester signed him to an offer sheet. They announced this on Saturday morning. So Toronto has until Monday evening, I believe it's Monday evening, to match it, or he becomes a Nighthawk. If they match it, then he stays with the Rock, and they're obviously free to trade him. I guess the best idea for the Rock, as far as we can tell, is for them to re-sign him and then trade him. If obviously they don't want to keep him, but it kind of sounds like bridges have been burned in that respect. So, I mean, Dowek did say that you're likely to have seen the last of Billings in a Rock uniform. So, as a pro poker player, it seems odd that he'd kind of paint himself into a corner that way, but he did. With the injury to Hellier, I mentioned this last week, that kind of gave him an out there and said, well, yeah, but with Hellier injured, we needed to re-sign Garrett. But didn't seem to have happened. And the Nighthawks have pressed the issue, and so now it looks like Billings will be playing in the MLL at some point this season. But whether it's for the Rock or for the Nighthawks or for somebody else, we still don't know. Yeah, Tyler, any thoughts?
I can only imagine that Billings had an offer from every team available to him, because a player of that caliber, even coming off an injury, if he's available, you make an offer. So I'm of the opinion that he chose to sign with Rochester, and he's putting all the wheels in motion to Toronto at this point, saying, I'm signing with Rochester. You match this offer, and I'm automatically signed with you back in Toronto, and that's fine. I know you'll immediately trade me. But instead of just holding my rights and not trading me, if I sign, I can force the trade or force you to start paying me, because he'll be signed at that point. Billings did it at the time where basically when the matching time ends, there'll be another 24 hours for the Rock to hit the trade deadline. So I think the timing was exactly where it was. And the other aspect is, since he had an offer from every team, presumably, it would be foolish not to have an offer from anybody, right? He could have just gone home to Vancouver and signed with them in his hometown of Langley, and then have made that kind of be like, you get nothing. But since he signed with Rochester, he's basically forcing the Rock to trade him and get something back instead of nothing. I think that is a good act of faith by Billings. And even if Toronto is too stubborn to sign him back, Billings then is a member of the three-time defending champs. And while they're not stellar at times right now, they know how to win when it counts. So he's got a good fallback plan to go to Rochester if he needs to. But otherwise, he'll be traded by the end of the day Tuesday, in my opinion. That's my thoughts.
Melissa, have you been looking into this situation at all?
I really haven't this week. This week's been kind of crazy. So most of what I know is from you guys, and it's very interesting to watch this unfold, knowing how much of an impact he had last year. And, if the Rock were in a different place than they are right now, it would probably be a whole different story. But the Rock are playing well without him and Colin Doyle. And so, yeah, you kind of have to, I think he doesn't have as much room to, much support to stand on as he would have if they weren't playing as well. So it's very interesting. It will, especially as how Rochester played this weekend, it'll be interesting to see if that actually impacts them or not. But yeah, it sounds like one way or another he is not going to be a Rock anymore.
I also think that even though there was a big hubbub at the start of the season when the Stealth traded for Palace, he's not meshing with that offense, and I could see the trade with the Stealth and the Rock being Billings for Palace. And I know, Graham, you're not a huge fan of gaining Palace, but you have two of the better but also oldest left-handers in the league, so you need to look to the future. I think locking up Palace could be a pretty smart move.
Yeah, that's certainly a decent point. That if you're going to replace, or if you're going to pick up a lefty forward to replace Sanderson and/or Doyle, unless they pull a John Tavares and keep playing, it's likely that neither of them lasts much more than a few more seasons. And depending on how Doyle's recovery from surgery goes, he may. Who knows what he's going to look like next year? Yeah, I guess my issue was, if you're going to juggle basically the strongest offense in the league, which the Rock have right now, I'm willing to do that for Garrett Billings. I'm not sure I'm willing to do that for Johnny Palace, just seeing how he's played this year. But if that's what you do, that's what you do. And if you're building for the future, quite honestly, an offense that consists of Hickey and Hellier and Powless, I'm okay with. And yeah, you're still going to get probably a year or two at least out of Sanderson and Doyle. I imagine they're not that close to retirement, but you're right. You don't want to. You can't focus on those guys for the next number of years. But yeah, the Rock are in kind of not the greatest position right now, and we were talking about this on Twitter last night. Basically, their options are sign Billings for more than you want to pay, or trade him for less than he's likely worth because everybody knows that you have no choice but to trade him, or let him go to Rochester and get nothing back. Any one of those three options is not the greatest, but I imagine the sign and trade option is probably the way to go. Personally, I would love for the Rock to just sign him and add him to the roster and be done with it. And that's easy for me to say because it's not my money. Dowick is the guy with the bucks, and if he decides that what Billings is asking for is too expensive, then that's his right. So, yeah, it should be an interesting couple of days to see how that all plays out. Yeah, I don't know. I guess the Rock have until Monday night to either sign him or announce they're not going to sign him. And if they sign him, then they have another day, like you said, Tyler, to actually make a trade. So all of this stuff should be done by Tuesday or Wednesday, I guess. So yeah, it should be an interesting couple of days. Speaking of interesting, Edmonton's game in Rochester on Saturday night. We all picked Edmonton to win this game. If we were to pick scores or we were to pick goal differentials, I'm pretty sure none of us would have chosen that Edmonton was going to win by 13. So that was a little surprising. Edmonton 16, Rochester 3. Yeah, this one was pretty surprising. Rochester tied their own regular season record for fewest goals by one team. Toronto actually beat Rochester 17-3 in 2010. And way back in '92, Detroit beat Pittsburgh 13-3. So the lowest score in a regular season game is 3. In the playoffs, Toronto beat Philadelphia 13-2 back in 1999, and that's the lowest in any game. Not counting mini games, of course, because they're a little shorter than most. Yeah, I watched this game, or I watched 3/4 of it anyway until the Toronto game started. Edmonton defense, obviously, I mean, goes without saying when you keep somebody like the Nighthawks to only 3 goals. Their defense was outstanding. Bold was great. Vince didn't have a great start. He was replaced by Goodleaf, who did a pretty good job in the rest of the first half. And then Vince came back in the third and was pretty good. Wasn't outstanding. Rochester only had 34 shots in this whole game. Edmonton had 64. Yeah, it was kind of it had to be a painful game for the Rochester fans to watch, and I did get a couple of messages on Twitter from people who was watching this saying this is just painful, and I've certainly been there. I'm sure we've all been there watching your team get completely blown out. And I remember thinking last year we all knew that Edmonton was one of the best defensive teams, certainly in the league, if not in league history. And their offense was good, at times very good, but they weren't known as an offensive team. They were known as a defensive team. This year, they're great offensively, they're great defensively, they're just great everywhere, which is a little odd because they've lost 4 games last year. They only lost 2. But I guess they look a little more human, but at the same time, they're just great on all facets of the game. What else did I have here? Yeah, the second half was even painful for non-Rochester fans to watch because it looked like Rochester just said, you know what, this is over. Our offense isn't working. Their defense is outstanding, so we basically have no shot in hell of coming back in this game, so let's just get it over with as soon as we can. And you kind of can't blame them, but at the same time, it's just painful to watch. Melissa, I know you didn't get a chance to see this one. How did you?
Yeah, I had it on until that Calgary game started as well. I felt comfortable switching away that I would not miss the greatest comeback ever because it was out of control. The game-winning goal came 6.5 minutes into the first quarter, which is bananas. At the start of the game, it was those 3 quick goals by Edmonton, which they've done the past couple weeks. They did it against Calgary a few weeks ago and ended up losing the game, so I didn't think it was over. But then they also did it against the Stealth even more recently, and then they held on and continued to dominate the Stealth. So Edmonton has definitely figured out how to come out of the locker room for the opening face-off energized and take control of the games. That's a pretty magical thing to have and start games out that way. Definitely something I'm worried about whenever you're going to be facing them. And this coming weekend, the Stealth have a home-and-home with Edmonton, and it's not looking pretty. Yeah, those 3 quick goals, and I immediately joked that it looks like Rochester signed Billings to shore up that defense because they were just letting in shots constantly and letting in goals. And then it turned into, it looks like they gave Billings an offer to shore up the offense as well because they scored 3. Nothing looked right for Rochester. That was pretty amazing to see the 3-time defending champ full of veterans and just completely dominated. I don't think I've ever seen that in any of my time. I've seen some low-scoring games, but not 3 and not from a team like Rochester. That's my thoughts on that one.
Yeah, this one really surprised me when I saw the score. I thought at first there was a typo because you wouldn't expect Rochester. I mean, Rochester's been playing good. They've been a little up and down, but really 1 goal a quarter after the first? I mean, that's crazy. And the fact that Edmonton definitely didn't let up is pretty important, but I would not have ever expected this from Rochester. That was very surprising to me. I'm just kind of flabbergasted.
All right, the next game, Toronto and Calgary, was a little different. Yeah, Calgary started off. Where did this go? I had it right here. Started off with 3 goals. 2 goals in the first 5 minutes and another one around the 12-minute mark. But the way that Nick Rose was playing prevented that from being at least 6-7-0 easy in the first quarter. Calgary offense was all over the place, but Rose was really stepping up and played a great game. Frankie Chiliano played a great game in the Calgary net as well, and I mentioned after the game, I don't know why neither of them was named named one of the 3 stars, where both of them played really well. Kind of an odd situation, I thought, anyway. When Hellier got hurt last week, Nick Diachenko took over on the offense and did a decent job. I mean, he's not Rob Hellier. You can't replace that kind of those kind of numbers, that kind of power. But I thought he did a pretty decent job. And the next week, Hellier's still out. But not only did they not go with Diachenko on the offense to replace Hellier, they scratched him from the game. He didn't even play. And they called up rookie Brandon Benn for his NLL debut. So that kind of, I'm sure that hurt for Diachenko. That hey guys, I'm here. I replaced Hellier last week. I'm still available to play this week. And no, we don't even want you in the game. We want this other guy who's never played in the NLL. So that was a bit strange. But Ben never ended up with any points, but I thought he played okay. I thought he had his first NLL goal at one point, but somebody else was in the crease. It was a pretty decent shot, but somebody's in the crease, so it was called off. And as per usual for a Toronto-Calgary game, it was pretty chippy. I don't think there were no actual fights in this game, but there was a lot of pushing and shoving, and Damon Edwards got tossed for what I guess looked like I think it was a high stick to the head. Now, I didn't see that particular play. I must have stepped out of the room for a few minutes or something, but I didn't actually see the play. But from a lot of the comments I saw later, including Brian Shanahan, it looked like a nasty play at the time, but if you watch the replay of it, it wasn't any big deal, and there really shouldn't have been a game misconduct for that. But right at the end, Dane Dobie and Sean Evans were just livid at something, to the point where Dobie got a unsportsmanlike conduct penalty with 15 seconds left. Both of them were just yelling at the refs constantly for the last few minutes. During the handshake lines, I mean, they both went through the handshake lines and there were no issues there, but Dobie in particular went through the handshake lines, didn't look at a single Rock player while doing that. He basically held his hand out and let them shake it while he was turned to the side, yelling at the ref the entire time. So I don't know what they were angry about. I joked that they were probably mad because they didn't feel that Damon Edwards should have been tossed from the game, so that's why they were so angry. Very entertaining game. Went back and forth. Toronto pulled it out at the end and are now 11-3. Calgary, as we've said a number of times, is the best last place team ever. Tyler, your thoughts?
I like watching these two teams play. They've got a great rivalry. Calgary actually had a lead in the fourth quarter until Toronto took the last 3 goals and tied it, got the game winner from Brett Hickey, and Brody Merrill sealed it with an empty netter at the end. I don't know. I can't believe the sportsmanship that you see from Calgary. Like, whenever they lose, they just whine. It's always the ref's fault. It has nothing to do with the fact they didn't score a goal in the last 10 minutes of the game. And I don't know how they can feel good about that. Like, if you're in charge of that team and you just see players whining constantly, I'd be like, I don't really want to bring that guy back, because all he does is whine and bring negative, not positive, happy attitudes to the team. But they also score tons of goals. Sean Evans leads the league in points without even playing as many games as everybody. It's fun to see them lose because of that. I mean, honestly, I don't care if they lose, because I just watch them whine. It's like, well, you don't deserve to win. Nobody wants you to win if you're going to act like complete bums. On more of a on-field issue, they're missing Jeff Snyder for a month now. I haven't heard anything about why, but they said the last game he played was around the 28th of February, so we're 4 weeks since then. And he's key to getting most of the things started. He's an emotional leader. He's actually matured, so he doesn't whine all the time, and he could probably keep the others in check. And he's not winning face-offs to get things started for them. So they're really missing him. I don't know why, like I said, and if we can figure out why and what's going on, it'd be pretty important to help right their ship for a final run. They've still got a chance. They're not out of it, of the playoffs, but it keeps slipping away a little bit every week. That's my thoughts. You're muted.
And I'm muted again.
Yeah, I really don't have anything to add that you guys haven't already covered, so.
All right. I guess we can move on to the game that just finished, an hour and a half ago or thereabouts, Minnesota, New England. Minnesota, I want to say, dominated this game. They didn't blow them away or anything. It was 13-9 final. It almost looked like Minnesota was going to take off and score a whole bunch of goals, and then New England would come back and score 1 or 2, and it almost looked like they were going to come back, but they never quite did, and Minnesota never quite took off. Honestly, I didn't think this was all that exciting a game. New England took 57 shots and only scored 9, so I mean, kudos to Zach Higgins for facing that many shots. Yeah, I don't have an awful lot to say about this game. A little over 5,000 people at the game. This was the best attendance at a New England game, New England home game, since their season opener. So good job for them. They're bumping up the crowds. Unfortunately, they've only won one of their last 8-9 games or something. So not really giving the hometown crowd much to cheer about. Yeah. Melissa, I guess you didn't see this one either.
Yeah, unfortunately, I was out celebrating my dad's 60th birthday, so this one was not. And I don't even know if we're going to be able to watch this one since Universal seems to have so many issues. And if you don't watch it live, it's just gone. I'm really curious why we had absolutely no NLL games yesterday. Or wait, no, two are yesterday, two are today, right?
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah, there was none on Friday. It was a kind of an odd weekend that way.
I was thinking
Um,
we had one on Friday.
yeah, we had nothing on Friday, two yesterday and two today, and the obviously the Vancouver Colorado game doesn't start for another 2.5 hours or so, so we can't really talk about that one. Tyler, did you happen to see the Minnesota one?
I was able to get it going at the start of the second quarter. I was trying to get on my tablet and kept saying not available, but I went over to my computer and I saw that you and Jake Elliott were watching it, even though the feed was started off poorly. So I was like, oh, maybe I'll just try the computer, or either it's working in Canada or not here. But I was able to get it finally. And I watched the rest of the game. It's very lackluster game with New England. I don't know, like it definitely was their biggest crowd, but you can't hear them. Nobody on the floor is flashy. They're kind of all just there to do work, and unfortunately, they're not also better than everybody apparently, that they can just do their average thing. They need some sort of spark plug, some reason for the fans to get excited, some reason, something to energize the team itself, instead of just going through the motions. They're in a tough spot, man. We talked about it every week. Like they started off 2-0 and we got all optimistic, and then they show us that they're not that great a team, and they should be looking to make some sort of move at the trade deadline or the free agent signing as it's coming up over the next week. They need something different, and let's see if they make any sort of moves. I don't have anything to say in the game. It was Minnesota took it to them. New England just kind of played boringly, not really that exciting, and they lost. They get 2 more games next week, I think, for New England to try and change things up. But I think they need to change their roster more than they need to change anything else at this point.
If only there was a big-name righty offensive player that was available that they could add to their lineup.
That could be interesting.
I guess the question is, would Billings play there? Like I said a couple of weeks ago, I remember reading a tweet somewhere saying that he's only interested in playing in Toronto and Vancouver, which, if true, greatly limits what the Rock can do. But having signed with the Nighthawks, obviously that has either changed or was never true in the first place.
And as much as he says he'll play for Langley, he really lives in Toronto for everything I know. So it'd be easier to get to Connecticut than it would to get to Vancouver for the games. Well, maybe it's not a direct flight. When you think about airplanes, it's going to go straight to the big city or to the middle of Connecticut. But for hours of travel, it would take less to get to those games in New England.
Probably true. So I guess you will be seeing the last game of the weekend, though, Melissa. Vancouver and Colorado comes up in a couple hours, and I believe you're off to see that one, are you not?
Yeah, we'll be heading out because the game starts at 6, so it's 3:30 now. So we'll be leaving probably in about hour-ish to go. So yeah, they're definitely hyping it up. I mean, they're raising Gavin Prout's banner up to the rafters, so that should be a lot of fun. He was definitely a fan favorite, and as he was captain of the 2016, which is the only team the Mammoth have actually won a championship. And one of the few years we actually made it past the first round of the playoffs. It is a pretty big deal. And he, like I said, he was definitely a fan favorite. He was one of those players, like we've talked about, that some players really shouldn't have the interaction with the fans. They're just really not that good. That's not Gavin Prout. Gavin Prout loves talking to the fans. He always has time for anybody who comes up to him, never makes him feel unwelcome. Has led to some interesting stories of some crazy fans, but That's beside the point. But he's one of those players that he just exudes enthusiasm for the game and enthusiasm for the whole experience and the fans. And so I know anytime he's come into town to watch the games, fans still flock to him. So you'd expect it to be a pretty packed house. I'm actually kind of thinking maybe since it's a Sunday game, we may not have quite the attendance that we're used to seeing at the Pepsi Center. But it should be fun. I think Vancouver, like I said last week, is going to be a spoiler, so we'll see.
Yeah.
All right.
I don't like Prout because he played well against the Stealth, but he's definitely somebody who's earned this ceremony and reward compared to, like, maybe he played for a long time and they reward him for a long time. He didn't play for a long time. He played great for a long time. So this will be a nice night for them to honor him.
I know a lot of fans were upset when it looked like he wasn't retiring as a Mammoth, and then when he essentially did, and it didn't look like he was getting any recognition. I know there was a little bit of an outcry, which is understandable because he did. He had such an impact on this team. He was the leader of this team for several years. So it is good to see him recognized the way he is being.
I don't remember the details of it, but when I read about this, I was a little surprised because I had a feeling that there was some kind of bad blood or some kind of something went wrong. So at the very end of his career there were issues between him and the Mammoth, and it didn't sound like this kind of thing was going to happen. So either I'm misremembering that, or the team has stepped up and just said, you know what, let's just drop all that crap behind us. He was a great player. He was a big part of this team. He deserves to be honored, and kudos to them for doing that.
Yeah, there was definitely some bad blood going on. There's lots of rumors about what actually occurred and who said what and why things were said and how things were said. But it seems like both sides have put it aside, and I think that's really good to see. Because he should be honored as the role model he actually was here. I know he's a very divisive player, as we've talked about, that a lot of people hate him because he can be a bit of a jerk in other cities when he's on the floor. I don't think I've ever heard of stories off the floor of him being a jerk to other fans, which is good, but it is good that they put it aside.
Just looking at his numbers and like you said, Tyler, he was very, very good player for a long time. He's number 9 all time in scoring, with 922 points in 184 games, and he will remain in the top 10 for quite some time, as it looks like. If you look at the players that are after him on the scoring list, are Blaine Manning, Micah Kersey, Tracy Kleski, Tom Marechek, all these guys that have retired as well, so they're not going to be catching up. The next 2 active players behind him are Mark Stainhouse, who's about 150 points back, and then Sean Evans, who's about 250 points back. Now that's not including this season, so both of them are a little closer. But either way, he's going to be in the top 10 of scoring all time for at least the next 2 years. So not bad for Mr. Prout. Predictions from last week. Obviously, we can only talk about, well, last week being this week. We can only talk about 3 of them because one of them hasn't happened yet. Tyler is 3-0. Nice job. Melissa and I are 2-1. And like I said, that's with 1 game remaining. So I am at 28-24 overall on the season. Tyler is at 500 at 26-26, and Melissa still holds the lead at 29-23. Now this coming week there are 8 games, so it's a crazy weekend. And I was going to say this might separate us all quite a bit. Somebody will have a great week, somebody will have a lousy week, but it looks like almost all of our picks are the same anyway. So it really may not make much of a difference other than the numbers will all get higher. I'll go over mine first. I'll try to keep it brief just because we could be talking for a half an hour here because there's so many games. Rochester and Toronto. I'm going to go with the Rock on this one. I thought about going with Rochester because they would be pretty PO'd after this past weekend. And and I can see this being a close game, but I'm going to go with the Rock on this one. New England, Minnesota. Yeah, this one was tough. I wasn't really sure where to go with this one. And part of it was I didn't want my picks to be identical to Tyler's, so I went with New England. Yeah, New England I thought looked pretty good today. They, like you said, Tyler, they just kind of showed up and played, and they didn't have anybody flashy. They didn't. At one point, somebody mentioned. I think what was going on was there was a lot of defense. I mean, obviously, Minnesota's defense was playing pretty well. New England couldn't really get anything going, and what the announcers were saying was that this is where Kevin Crowley needs to not so much step it up, but he needs to make things happen. Rather than just looking for opportunities, he needs to go in there and make opportunities. And since he's an elite player in the league, that's what he should be doing. And I would argue that that's exactly what makes him not an elite player in this league. He's a very good player, no question. But I don't think I'd put him in the elite category. I mean, you could even argue he's not even the best player on his team when you look at somebody like Pat Saunders, who played really well today. But at the same time, New England is more of a score-by-committee kind of team. They're not looking for Crowley to score 100 points and everybody else to kind of help him out. So they kind of just spread the points out a little more. But, yeah, I'm going to pick New England for that game. Calgary and Colorado play a couple of times, once in Colorado and once in Calgary. I'm going to split those and say that the home team wins each one of those. Vancouver, Edmonton, can't really go against Edmonton, particularly after yesterday's game. But I'm going to have to go with them. Actually, sorry, Edmonton, Vancouver play twice, once in Edmonton, once in Vancouver. They're doing the same thing as Colorado and Calgary. But I don't call for a split there. I'm going to say Edmonton wins both of those. New England and Buffalo. Even if New England comes back and has a decent game and beats Minnesota, I don't think they're going to beat the Bandits, so I'm going to go for Buffalo there. Minnesota, Rochester. Again, even if Rochester loses again to Toronto, that'll be their second straight loss. I don't see them losing to Minnesota. The other two I've already mentioned, Colorado and Calgary and Edmonton, Vancouver. Yeah, so I guess that's all of mine. Tyler, you want to go next?
Yeah, we're going to be pretty similar. I did make a late change here. Rochester at Toronto. I mean, Rochester is definitely going to try and show that it was a fluke, but Toronto is the best team in the East right now, so everything says that they can and should win the game. New England at Minnesota. I'm going to go with Minnesota. They've got everybody back healthy. Callum Crawford's been back. They look better with him around. They showed it today. They'll do it again next time they meet. Calgary at Colorado. I've got Colorado winning at home. Just something to, I don't know, the refs will make it so that Calgary loses and they can scream at the refs. Something like that. Vancouver at Edmonton, and then the night later, Edmonton at Vancouver. I'm picking Edmonton for both. They're going to come out quick, and the Stealth have no answer for anything right now. Unless there is a trade and they get Billings, but even then, they got to mesh Billings in against the top team. That's not going to happen smoothly, and not against Edmonton. So I wouldn't change my pick regardless. Then New England goes to Buffalo. Still, it's the New England team that has no focus, no shine, nothing fun to cheer for that I can see, no reason for me to pick them. So I go with Buffalo. Minnesota heads over to Rochester, and after the embarrassment yesterday and then losing to Toronto, they'll be so thankful to face a second-tier team like Minnesota and should be able to get the win at home. So I'm picking Rochester there. Colorado at Calgary is tough. I had Calgary here until about 30 seconds ago, and I realized Colorado goes to Calgary and beats them there, and they do it a lot. So I have no problem picking Colorado in Calgary once I thought about it. It'd be interesting to see them sweep the weekend series, but I think they can. So I'm going to pick Colorado there. And then the last one was Edmonton at Vancouver, which isn't the Edmonton win, like I said. So those are my picks. How about you, Melissa?
A lot of similar picks here. So Rochester and Toronto, going with Toronto. After the stumble Rochester had, I think Toronto is clicking a little bit too well for me to pick against them right now with most teams. New England and Minnesota. I keep wanting to cheer for New England, and I want to be positive towards them, and they're not giving us anything. So I got to go with Minnie. Calgary and Colorado. This one's tough. I had Calgary initially, and I changed it to Colorado. Calgary definitely wins here a lot, and most seasons I would be pretty confident picking Calgary. But right now, Calgary is not the team that we expect, and they have a lot of issues, and I think this is going to be one of the few weekends that I would ever pick Colorado to actually sweep, because I almost always pick them to split, because it's rare that they actually do. With Vancouver at Edmonton, I'm going to go with Edmonton. Again, Edmonton's just clicking right now. They are just firing on all cylinders. I cannot pick Vancouver. New England and Buffalo, again, Buffalo stronger there. Rochester over Minnesota. I'm picking Colorado, as I said, and then Edmonton. So yeah, I'm actually expecting a lot of sweeps this weekend, which normally I would not be calling. So should be interesting.
It will be an interesting weekend.
We usually see lots of splits, but I can't pick the splits based on these matchups.
So next weekend is also Easter, so I'm away for at least part of the weekend. So there may be some more scheduling issues next week. We'll see what happens, whether we move the show to another day or if we are short somebody. But we will figure that out and be back at some point next week, hopefully. I guess that's it for the show this week. AddictedToLacrosse.com is where you want to go to get all of our old shows. You can send us email at feedback@addictedtolacrosse.com. We're on Facebook as well, facebook.com/laxpodcast, and of course Twitter, laxpodcast there as well. Send us your comments and questions and such. We appreciate your feedback. That's about it. This has been another episode of Addicted to Lacrosse. For Tyler and Melissa, I'm Graham. Thanks for watching, and we will see you next week.